Guadalcanal, August 1942, midnight. Rain lashes the black jungle like a living thing, turning the air thick and electric. Japanese scouts crouch on a nearby ridge, their rifles slick with moisture staring across the dark valley, where only hours ago there was nothing but swamp and mangrove and the endless whisper of insects. Now, lights. Faint at first, like fireflies trapped in fog, then stronger. A constellation bleeding through the darkness where no constellation should exist. A hum builds beneath the rain, low and mechanical. Diesel engines, distant shouts, the metallic rhythm of shovels biting earth. By sunrise, their commander reports something that cannot be real. The Americans have built an airfield, overnight. It is a message that will echo across every island, every command post, every trench in the Pacific. A realization that shatters the myth of invincibility and reveals the terrifying precision of American logistics. This is the story of how the United States turned jungles into runways and disbelief into defeat. In early 1942, Japan stretches across the Pacific like a steel tide from the smoking ruins of Manila to the green mountains of New Guinea to the outer arcs of Micronesia, where the ocean swallows the horizon. To their soldiers, the jungle is an ally. The heat, the disease, the isolation that breaks Western men, these are weapons as deadly as any bayonet. To their commanders, time itself bends in their favor. They have conquered an empire in months. They believe the Americans lack the will, the stamina, the spirit to fight back. The United States, still reeling from Pearl Harbor, has neither air bases nor infrastructure within striking range of Japanese positions. No foothold. No runway closer than Hawaii or Australia, thousands of miles of empty ocean away. Every bomber sent toward enemy territory must turn back before reaching its target. Every fighter pilot knows the math: not enough fuel, not enough range, not enough time. Yet within months, the impossible begins. At Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, wherever Marines storm ashore with blood on the sand, American engineers follow. They do not wait for the war to move forward. They do not wait for supply lines to stabilize or for the enemy to retreat. They build the war itself, one airstrip, one bulldozer, one sleepless night at a time. What the Japanese see as chaos is in truth a miracle of planning, a fusion of industry and will that no empire has ever attempted before. Not the Romans with their roads, not Napoleon with his artillery trains, not even the British at the height of their naval power. This is something new. Something that defies the old logic of warfare, because the Americans do not conquer territory to hold it. They conquer it to transform it, to turn coral into concrete, swamp into steel, darkness into light. And the question that haunts every Japanese officer who witnesses it, the question whispered in disbelief across radio transmissions and scrawled in stunned reports, is this: how could they build functioning airfields seemingly overnight? How could machines appear where there were no ships? How could runways emerge from nothing, as if summoned by some industrial sorcery? And how did this single capability alter the balance of the Pacific War forever? The answer begins with men who were never supposed to be soldiers. December 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. America mobilizes. But the Navy faces a problem that bullets cannot solve. They need bases, harbors, airstrips, fuel depots, roads carved through jungle and coral. They need them fast. They need them everywhere. And the civilian contractors who built peacetime projects, men who worked under union rules and 8-hour days, cannot operate under fire, will not sign contracts that require them to dodge bullets while pouring concrete. So the Navy creates something unprecedented: the construction battalions, CBs. They will be called a nickname born from the initials CB. That will become legend. These are not 18-year-old farm boys drafted into service. These are carpenters, welders, electricians, heavy equipment operators, men in their 30s and 40s who know the language of diesel engines and load-bearing calculations. Men who have built bridges in Montana, dams in Tennessee, highways across the Midwest. Now, they are given uniforms, rifles. 6 weeks of boot camp that teaches them to march and shoot, though their real weapons are bulldozers and dynamite cranes and concrete mixers. Their motto stitched onto every patch, every banner, every piece of equipment they touch: we build, we fight. It sounds like propaganda, like something dreamed up in a Washington office to boost morale. But in the Pacific under fire, it becomes literal truth. At Guadalcanal, a CB named Frank Iafrate operates a bulldozer, while Japanese snipers fire from the tree line. He does not stop, does not take cover, because if he stops, the runway does not get built. And if the runway does not get built, the fighters cannot land. And if the fighters cannot land, the Marines die. So he keeps the blade down, keeps moving earth, while bullets spark off the metal frame around him. At Bougainville, when Japanese infantry overrun a construction site at dawn, the CBs drop their tools and pick up rifles. They hold the line for 2 hours, until Marine reinforcements arrive. Then they return to building as if the firefight was just another delay, another problem to solve. This is what the Japanese cannot comprehend. That the Americans have created a hybrid breed of warrior, men who lay pierced steel planking under artillery bombardment, who weld seams on fuel tanks while bombs fall 200 yards away, who repair craters in runways at midnight using flashlights wrapped in red cloth so enemy pilots cannot spot them from above. Traditional armies have engineers, of course. Every military does. But they operate behind the lines. They wait for territory to be secured, for the fighting to move on, for safety to return. The CBs do not wait. They arrive with the first wave, sometimes before it. They build while the battle rages. And if the enemy attacks, they fight back with whatever is in their hands, a wrench, a rifle, a bulldozer blade used as a battering ram. By the end of the war, over 300,000 men will serve in the CBs. They will build more than 400 airstrips across the Pacific. They will construct bridges, roads, hospitals, command centers, entire artificial harbors assembled from floating steel sections. But in 1942, they are still new, still unproven, still a gamble that might fail spectacularly. The Japanese, watching from their fortified positions, see these strange engineer soldiers and laugh. What kind of army sends builders into combat? What kind of madness is this? They do not yet understand that they are witnessing the transformation of warfare itself, that the power to construct is becoming as decisive as the power to destroy, that the Americans have turned logistics into a weapon sharper than any sword. They will understand soon enough. August 7th, 1942. Marines storm ashore at Guadalcanal, a malarial island that most Americans have never heard of, whose name they cannot pronounce. The landing is chaotic but successful. Japanese construction crews, caught by surprise, flee into the jungle, abandoning equipment, half-eaten meals, tools still warm in their hands. The Marines secure Lunga Point, and they're carved partially into the earth. They find something remarkable. The Japanese have already begun building an airfield. Not finished, not operational, but the foundation is there. Graded earth, preliminary drainage, the skeleton of what could become a strategic asset. The American commanders make an instant decision: finish it. Not in weeks, not even in days. Finish it now before the Japanese can regroup, before their navy returns, before this fragile toehold collapses. The CBs land with the second wave, wading through surf, with their equipment wrapped in tarps, hauling portable generators and welding kits, and surveying instruments through knee-deep mud. They assess the site in hours. Trucks arrive carrying pierced steel planking, interlocking metal mats that can be laid directly onto graded earth, transforming soft ground into a surface hard enough to support a fighter plane. They work without stopping, day and night, no shifts, no breaks. Men sleep in 2-hour intervals on the ground beside their bulldozers, then wake and return to work. The jungle is an oven. Humidity climbs past 90%. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes swarm in clouds so thick you breathe them. Dysentery runs through the crews like wildfire. And every day, Japanese reconnaissance planes circle overhead, observing, reporting back to their commanders. The reports say the Americans are attempting to build an airfield. The commanders dismiss this as fantasy. An airfield requires months of preparation, surveying infrastructure. The Americans have been on the island for less than 2 weeks. They are under constant attack. Their supply lines are vulnerable. This is impossible. But on August 20th, 1942, the impossible lands. 19 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers touch down on Henderson Field, named for a Marine pilot killed at Midway. The runway is not perfect. It is barely finished, but it is operational, functional, real. Japanese intelligence officers receive the news and do not believe it. They demand confirmation. Aerial photographs, eyewitness accounts. The photographs arrive. There, carved into the jungle where nothing existed 2 weeks prior, is a 1,500-foot runway capable of launching and recovering aircraft. The myth of Japanese invincibility, already cracked at Midway, fractures further, because this is not just a tactical victory. This is a statement, a demonstration of capability that rewrites the rules of the Pacific Campaign. The Americans have not waited for the war to come to them. They have not slowly built up supply chains and infrastructure over months of careful planning. They have simply arrived and created what they needed from nothing, as if conjuring air power from coral dust and willpower. For the Marines on Guadalcanal, Henderson Field becomes more than an airstrip. It becomes salvation. Japanese warships shell the island almost every night, battleships firing from offshore with impunity. But during the day, American fighters launch from Henderson, attacking the ships, harassing their supply convoys, making every Japanese movement costly and dangerous. The island becomes a meat grinder, a brutal months-long campaign of attrition. But the Americans hold. And they hold because Henderson Field continues operating, continues launching planes even as craters appear in the runway from overnight bombardment. Seabees repair the damage before dawn, filling holes with crushed coral, relaying sections of steel matting by flashlight. By sunrise, fighters are taking off again, as if the destruction never happened. The Japanese soldiers watching from their positions in the hills cannot process what they are seeing. The Americans had not waited for dawn. They had made it themselves. There is a number that haunts the Japanese war planners, though they do not learn it until too late. 300,000. That is how many men will serve in the Seabees before the war ends. 300,000 skilled laborers turned into a construction army larger than some nations' entire military forces. But numbers alone do not tell the story. It is what those numbers accomplish that defies comprehension. 400 airstrips built across the Pacific Theater. Not small emergency landing zones, but fully operational airbases with fuel storage, ammunition depots, repair facilities, control towers, some constructed in weeks, some in days, a few like Henderson Field functional within hours of the first bulldozer blade biting earth. The secret is not courage, though courage is required. The secret is not speed, though speed is essential. The secret is a revolution in thinking that American industry has perfected, and the military has weaponized prefabrication. In stateside, factories workers manufacture pierced steel planking by the thousands of tons, interlocking metal mats, each 10 feet long, 3 feet wide, punched with holes to reduce weight and allow drainage. They can be rolled, stacked, transported in the holds of cargo ships, then unloaded and assembled like an enormous steel puzzle. One crew with the right equipment can lay 1,000 square feet of runway surface in an hour. No concrete needed, no waiting for foundations to cure. Just grade the earth, compact it, roll out the matting, lock the pieces together. What would take months using traditional construction methods now takes days. The Japanese have nothing comparable. Their engineers still think in terms of permanent installations, concrete runways that require weeks to pour, and set infrastructure that assumes time and security. They build as if the war will wait for them to finish. The Americans build as if the war is already over, and they have won. Cargo ships arrive at contested islands carrying entire airfields in their holds. Bulldozers, graders, rollers, fuel trucks, everything needed to transform jungle into airbase. The ships unload directly onto beaches using amphibious vehicles that drive straight from water to land without need for docks or piers. Japanese observers watch through binoculars and cannot believe the scale. One American cargo vessel carries more construction equipment than an entire Japanese engineering battalion possesses. A single American bulldozer, operated by one man, moves more earth in an hour than 2,000 Japanese soldiers with shovels can move in a day. This is the mathematics of industrial warfare, the cold equation that decides empires. Japan's military philosophy emphasizes spirit over materiel, bushido over machinery, the warrior's will as the ultimate weapon. But will cannot grade a runway. Spirit cannot weld steel. And all the courage in the world means nothing when your enemy can build faster than you can destroy. At Peleliu, the Japanese conduct a pre-invasion bombardment specifically targeting American construction equipment still aboard transport ships in the harbor. They destroy 3 bulldozers, 2 graders, and a fuel truck. They celebrate this as a victory, believing they have crippled American airfield construction capacity. Replacement equipment arrives within 48 hours. The Japanese commander reading the reconnaissance report stares at the paper in silence. They destroyed equipment that cannot be replaced quickly, that represents months of manufacturing and shipping. And yet, the Americans simply send more, as if bulldozers grow on trees, as if the supply is infinite. In a sense it is, because behind every CB on every island is the full weight of American industrial capacity. Factories running 3 shifts, steel mills pouring metal around the clock, shipyards launching cargo vessels faster than submarines can sink them. The mathematics of victory favor those who can build faster than the enemy can destroy. And in this equation, this brutal calculus of war, Japan is solving for the wrong variable entirely. They fight with steel and sacrifice. America fights with steel hands. There is a photograph from Bougainville, November 1943, that captures something essential about the Seabees, though most people will never see it. A bulldozer operator sits in his cab hands, still on the controls, while smoke rises from a tree line 60 yards away. Japanese artillery has been firing for 20 minutes. Shells have cratered the earth around him. One landed close enough to pepper the machine's side with shrapnel, leaving holes like bullet wounds in the yellow paint. The operator has not moved, has not abandoned his position. Because the runway must be finished before nightfall, and nightfall is 3 hours away, and 3 hours is exactly enough time if nobody stops working. This is the reality that no training manual prepared them for. The Seabees do not build behind the lines. There are no lines. On islands like Peleliu and Okinawa, the front is everywhere and nowhere. Japanese soldiers hide in caves in spider holes in jungle so dense that an enemy machine gun nest can be 10 feet away and invisible. So the Seabees build while mortars fall. They grade earth while snipers fire from trees. They weld fuel tanks while the ground shakes from artillery, while pieces of shrapnel sing through the air like lethal music. At Peleliu, the Japanese have zeroed their artillery on the airfield construction site. They know exactly where the Americans are working. They have pre-sighted every square meter, and every afternoon, like clockwork, the shells begin falling. The Seabees learn to read the sound, the distant thump of the gun, the whistle growing louder. They count seconds, judge trajectory, decide whether to run or keep working. Sometimes they guess wrong. Sometimes the math is cruel, but they do not stop building. At night, when Japanese bombers appear overhead, the work continues in darkness. Flashlights wrapped in red cloth to preserve night vision and make them harder to spot from above. Men feel their way along sections of steel matting, connecting pieces by touch, by memory, by the desperate knowledge that every hour the strip is down means another pilot dead in the sky, another Marine without air support, another shipload of wounded that cannot be evacuated. On Okinawa, a Seabee named Robert Shaw is operating a grader when a mortar round hits 20 feet away. Shrapnel tears through his left arm. He stops the machine, wraps the wound with his shirt, injects himself with morphine from his field kit, and continues working. When his crew chief finds him 2 hours later, Shaw has graded another 200 feet of runway. He is passing in and out of consciousness from blood loss, but the blade is still down, still moving earth. They evacuate him to a field hospital. He returns to duty 8 days later. This is not exceptional. This is standard. This is what they do. The Japanese soldiers watching from their fortified positions begin to understand something that their commanders still refuse to accept. These Americans are not soft, not weak, not the decadent enemy that propaganda promised. They are something else entirely, something relentless. You can shell them and they rebuild overnight. You can snipe their operators and new ones climb into the seats. You can crater their runways and by dawn the craters are filled, the surface smooth fighters launching as if nothing happened. At Iwo Jima, Japanese artillery destroys a section of Motoyama airfield within hours of its completion. The Seabees repair it in darkness, working through a night bombardment, 30 men scrambling across torn earth with slabs of steel matting, while shells scream overhead. By morning, bombers are landing to refuel for their runs against mainland Japan. Every hour the strip was down meant another pilot dead in the sky. So they did not let the strip stay down, did not let the enemy win even a single night, because time in the end was the only thing that mattered. And time belonged to those who refused to stop building. In a bunker on Bougainville, a Japanese officer named Lieutenant Takashi Yamamoto writes in his diary by candlelight, The entry is dated November 1943. His handwriting is precise, controlled, but the words carry a tremor of something new, something like fear. Today I watched them build. We fired artillery for 6 hours, destroyed their machines twice, killed perhaps a dozen men. By evening, the runway was longer than it was this morning. I do not understand how this is possible. Where do they get more machines, more men? It is as if we are fighting not an army, but a factory that bleeds steel. His diary will be recovered after the war, along with hundreds of others. And in those pages, in the private thoughts of men who believed they were fighting for a divine empire, a pattern emerges. Disbelief, confusion, a slow dawning realization that they have misunderstood their enemy completely. The Japanese military culture emphasizes the superiority of spirit over matter. They have been taught that one Japanese soldier infused with Bushido and fighting spirit is worth 10 Americans. That the Western powers are soft, industrialized, spiritually hollow. That they will break when faced with true hardship. But the Americans do not break. They build. And worse, from the Japanese perspective, they build casually, without ceremony, without the proper respect for the enormity of the task. They arrive with machines that seem almost alive, roaring diesel beasts that reshape the earth as easily as a man shapes clay. They operate these machines while chewing gum, while joking, while listening to music on portable radios. This casual competence is more demoralizing than any battlefield defeat. A captured Japanese engineer interrogated on Saipan tries to explain his army's approach. They have labor battalions, he says, thousands of men with shovels and pickaxes working in shifts moving earth by hand. It is honorable work. It builds character. It unifies the men through shared suffering. The American interrogator asks how long it takes to build a runway using these methods. The engineer considers. 6 weeks perhaps, if the weather is good, if supplies arrive on schedule, if the men stay healthy. The interrogator does not respond immediately. He is thinking of Henderson Field, of runways built in days, of islands where the first bulldozer comes ashore with the Marines and begins work while bullets are still flying. Finally, he says, we can do it in 72 hours. The Japanese engineer believes this is a joke, a boast. When he realizes the American is serious, something changes in his expression. Not anger, not even shame. Just a kind of exhausted comprehension, as if a puzzle he has been trying to solve has suddenly revealed its answer. The Americans fight with machines, with industrial capacity, with a philosophy that treats warfare as a problem to be solved through engineering and logistics, rather than courage and spirit. One American bulldozer, operated by a single man, replaces 2,000 soldiers with shovels, and the Americans have hundreds of bulldozers, thousands. In Tokyo, military planners review reports from the Pacific and refuse to believe them. They insist the numbers are exaggerated, that Americans are inflating their capabilities for propaganda purposes, that no nation could build this fast, supply this, efficiently replace losses this quickly. But in the field, the soldiers know better. They watch the lights appear in the jungle darkness. They hear the diesel engines roaring through the night. They wake to find runways where there were none, aircraft carriers made of coral and steel. An enemy that does not wait for permission to advance but simply builds its own path forward. One Japanese soldier captured on Peleliu is asked what frightened him most about the Americans. He thinks for a long moment. Then he says through a translator, they do not respect the impossible. They see it and they build anyway. The Americans fought with steel hands, and steel in the end does not tire, does not doubt, does not stop. Tarawa, November 1943. The Marines have taken the island at terrible cost. Bodies float in the lagoon. The beach is red with blood. But the engineers are already wading ashore, and they are looking at something the Marines did not notice in the chaos of combat: coral. Millions of years of compressed calcium carbonate, white as bone, hard as stone. The entire atoll is built from it. And coral, when crushed and mixed with seawater and a small amount of Portland cement, becomes something remarkable. It becomes natural concrete. Within days, Seabees are quarrying coral directly from the reef, feeding it through crushers, mixing it with minimal cement supplies shipped from Hawaii. They pour runways that cure harder than traditional concrete, that can bear the weight of heavy bombers that cost a fraction of what conventional construction would require. It is alchemy. taking the island itself and transforming it into infrastructure, using the Pacific's own geology as a weapon. At Saipan, engineers discover that volcanic rock, when properly graded and compacted, creates an even better base layer than coral. They adapt instantly, recalculate, redesign their methods on the fly. This is the genius that the Japanese cannot replicate, not because they lack intelligence or skill, but because their military structure does not allow for it. Japanese engineers follow plans created in Tokyo by officers who have never seen the islands. If the plan calls for concrete and no concrete is available, they wait. They request supplies. They follow the chain of command. American engineers look at what they have and build anyway. On Eniwetok Atoll, Seabees construct a floating dry dock from prefabricated steel sections, assembling it in the lagoon like an enormous puzzle. Ships can now be repaired without sailing back to Pearl Harbor. Thousands of miles of transit eliminated, weeks of downtime converted into days. At Ulithi, they build an entire artificial harbor, complete with fuel storage, ammunition depots, fresh water distillation plants, even a movie theater and post office. It becomes the forward staging base for the entire Pacific Fleet. And it is built in 4 months on an atoll that appeared on no strategic maps before 1944. The Japanese watch through reconnaissance flights and cannot comprehend the scale. The Americans are not capturing territory, they are terraforming it, reshaping entire islands to serve their needs. Building bases where no bases should exist in atolls, with no fresh water, no natural harbors, nothing but coral and sand and determination. Pontoon piers that can be assembled in hours, allowing cargo ships to unload without beaching. Modular runways that can be extended or relocated as needed. Amphibious bulldozers that can grade underwater approaches, creating landing zones where the coral would normally rip apart landing craft. Every problem generates innovation. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity to invent something new. On Peleliu, when Japanese defenders flood the airfield construction site by destroying a nearby dam, Seabees build a drainage system overnight using salvaged Japanese pipes and American ingenuity. By morning, the water is gone and work continues. At Iwo Jima, volcanic ash keeps collapsing runway edges. Engineers solve it by mixing the ash with aviation fuel, creating a crude but effective binder that stabilizes the surface. The runway smells like a refinery and probably violates every peacetime safety regulation, but it works. The airfield becomes the new fortress, not a defensive position to be held, but an offensive platform to be built. Mobility over entrenchment, speed over permanence, the ability to project power forward faster than the enemy can respond. Time becomes America's ultimate weapon, and the Seabees are the ones who manufacture time, who create it from nothing, who turn every captured island into a countdown clock ticking toward Japan's defeat. Because every runway is a step closer, every base is a leap across the Pacific, every impossible construction project is a promise that distance no longer matters, that the ocean no longer protects, that the sky itself now belongs to America. If you could see the Pacific from above in 1945, see it as the gods might see it, you would notice something strange. A pattern, a chain of lights stretching across thousands of miles of empty ocean, from Hawaii to Guadalcanal to Tarawa to Saipan to Iwo Jima to Okinawa. Each light marking an airfield, each airfield a stepping stone. Together they form a bridge made of steel and coral and American will, reaching inexorably toward Japan. This is the island-hopping strategy made visible. Not a conquest of territory for its own sake, but a deliberate construction project spanning half the world. Each captured island is valuable only for what can be built upon it, for how much closer it brings the bombers to their targets. Guadalcanal falls in 1943. Henderson Field enables strikes against Rabaul and the Solomon Islands chain. The Japanese lose their forward air bases, their ability to threaten Australia, their defensive perimeter. Tarawa and the Marshall Islands fall in late 1943 and early 1944. Suddenly, American bombers can reach the Marianas. The next link in the chain becomes visible. Saipan, Tinian and Guam fall in summer 1944. And here the Seabees build something unprecedented. Not just airfields, but superfortress bases. Runways 8,000 feet long, capable of handling B-29 bombers, the massive 4-engine aircraft that can carry 10 tons of bombs 1,500 miles. From the Marianas, Tokyo is within range. The Japanese High Command realizes too late what has been built around them. They are not being surrounded by armies, they are being surrounded by runways. Each one a platform for destruction. Each one built faster than they can be destroyed. Each one bringing fire closer to the home islands. On Iwo Jima, the mathematics become brutal and simple. The island is tiny, barely 8 square miles, but it sits directly between the Marianas and Japan. Japanese fighters based on Iwo intercept American bombing raids. American bombers damaged over Tokyo cannot reach Iwo for emergency landings. Every mission is a suicide calculation of fuel and distance. So Iwo Jima must be taken, must be transformed, must become American. The battle is savage. Nearly 7,000 Americans die. 20,000 Japanese defenders fight almost to the last man. But even before the fighting ends, even while Marines are still clearing caves in the northern hills, the Seabees land. They begin building, while mortar rounds still fall. While Japanese holdouts emerge at night to attack the construction crews, while the island is still technically a battlefield. The first emergency landing happens on March 4th, 1945, while the battle still rages. A B-29 named Dynamite, crippled by Japanese fighters, limps toward Iwo with one engine dead and fuel running out. The runway is barely finished, still has debris and shell craters at the edges. But it is long enough and smooth enough. Dynamite touches down. 11 crew members survive who would have died in the ocean. The Seabees working nearby barely pause. They wave. The bomber crew waves back. Then everyone returns to work. By war's end, over 2,400 B, 29 emergency landings will occur on Iwo Jima. Estimates suggest this saves 27,000 American lives. 27,000 pilots, bombardiers, navigators, gunners, who would have drowned in the Pacific or been captured if that runway did not exist. The island costs 7,000 American lives to capture. It saves 27,000. The mathematics are cruel but clear. And from Okinawa, the final stepping stone, American aircraft can reach every city in Japan. The sky bridge is complete. The impossible chain of airfields built under fire, built overnight, built from nothing but American industrial might and Seabee determination now stretches from Pearl Harbor to the doorstep of Tokyo. The Japanese realize, in those final months, that they have been defeated not by soldiers, but by builders. By men who turned coral into runways and distance into irrelevance. By a nation that treated logistics as warfare and construction as conquest. Every runway was a promise that the sky itself now belonged to America, and promises once built from steel cannot be broken. The men who built the Pacific airfields were not remembered with monuments or medals. Most returned home to civilian life, to the construction jobs they had left, to the quiet anonymity of peacetime. They did not march in victory parades. Their names do not appear in history books, alongside generals and admirals, but their monuments exist. They are the airfields themselves, the ones still visible today, if you know where to look. Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, overgrown now with jungle grass, its outline still faintly visible from the air. The runways on Tinian cracked and weathered but unmistakable, where the Enola Gay took off on its mission to Hiroshima. Iwo Jima's airstrip still maintained, still operational, still saving lives 70 years after they were built under fire. These are not monuments to destruction, they are monuments to creation amid chaos. To the possibility of building even when everything around you is burning. After the war, something unexpected happens. Japanese engineers rebuilding their shattered nation study American construction methods. They analyze the Seabees techniques, the prefabrication, the modular design, the speed and adaptability that seemed like magic during the war. They learn, they adapt, they incorporate these lessons into their own industrial rebirth. There is a kind of poetry in this. The nation that once watched in disbelief as Americans built overnight now uses those same methods to rebuild Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima. The enemy becomes the teacher. The impossible becomes standard practice. What the Pacific War revealed was not just military superiority, but a different philosophy of human capability. The Americans did not see obstacles as permanent. They saw them as problems waiting for solutions. They did not respect the impossible. They bulldozed it. This was not arrogance, it was something deeper. A cultural belief that the world could be shaped, that geography could be overcome, that time itself could be manufactured through ingenuity and will. The miracle was never the speed. Speed was just a symptom. The miracle was the cooperation, the fusion of industrial capacity and human determination, the ability of 300,000 men to work toward a single purpose, to trust each other with their lives to keep building, even when death was falling from the sky. For every airfield, a message remained, that the power to build is stronger than the will to destroy. That creation, even in the midst of war, is the most human act of all. And for the Japanese soldiers, who once watched in disbelief, it was proof that imagination wedded to industry is the deadliest weapon of all. Today, if you walk across Guadalcanal, you will still see the faint outline of Henderson Field. The jungle has reclaimed most of it. Vines crawl across what was once steel matting. Trees grow through craters that were filled 70 years ago by men working in darkness. The humid air hums with insects, the same insects that tormented the sea bees through endless tropical nights. But beneath the soil and vegetation lies the story of a generation that turned disbelief into achievement and war into a blueprint for possibility. Local guides will take you there if you ask. They will point to the depressions in the earth, where bulldozers once moved to the slight rise, where the control tower stood to the beach, where the first equipment came ashore. They know the stories. They have heard them from their grandparents who watched the impossible happen. The Americans who built these airfields are old now or gone. The last Seabees from Guadalcanal are in their 90s. Soon there will be no one left who remembers the night. The lights appeared in the jungle. Who remembers the sound of diesel engines roaring through the darkness? Who remembers what it felt like to build while the world burned around them? But the lesson remains carved into coral and steel and memory. As one Seabee named James O'Connor wrote in a letter home discovered years later in a family attic, "We didn't just fight the enemy, we fought the impossible and we won. Not with bullets, but with bulldozers. Not with destruction, but with creation. And I think in the end, that's what America does best. We build. War changes men. It always has. It breaks some and hardens others, and leaves scars that never fully heal. But sometimes, in the rarest moments, war reveals something else. It reveals what humans can accomplish when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. When asked to do the impossible, and given nothing but tools and determination, and the belief that maybe, just maybe, the impossible is simply a problem that hasn't been solved yet. The runways are quiet now. The bombers no longer thunder overhead. The jungle whispers where engines once roared. But the promise remains, that we are builders. That we always have been. That we always will be.